Hello, welcome back to the Bear Make It YouTube channel. Today we're going to replace this old coffee table with this new coffee table. Let's get started. Alright, so the coffee table that we're making is all coming from one sheet of plywood. The guys over at the Modern Maker podcast, good podcast, I recommend checking it out, put out a challenge that you wanted to build a project with one sheet of plywood. You could use some other materials if necessary, but primary ingredient needed to be one 4x8 sheet of plywood. I'm using 3/4 inch plywood I got from Home Depot. You can probably tell that it's almost a U shape. I didn't realize when I grabbed it that it was probably the most warped sheet of plywood that they had. But since I'm going to be chunking it up into smaller pieces, a lot of that warp isn't going to be noticeable, and then glue will hold down whatever is noticeable to make it not noticeable anymore. Okay, now I've got 15 1-inch strips that I'm cutting into 3 different size pieces: a long, a medium, and then a short. These are the long pieces that I'm cutting here. They're going to be the bulk of the tabletop. I think I ended up with 264 of these ones. It just so happened that this tote fit perfectly in my table saw rails. When I took the actual fence off, I could just set it there and fill it up. And these are the short ones. They're just going to be on the ends, or the medium ones, not the short ones. The short ones I'm cutting here. I did my math wrong, but I cut 336 of these. I had quite a few extra. I don't know how many extra, but quite a few, so somewhere I goofed up. But then with all the pieces cut, it was time to move on to gluing up the top panel, which I actually did in 3 separate sections, each one between, I think, 6 and 10 inches. Total, it came out to be about 24 inches wide, about 2 feet wide for the tabletop. And this was just a matter of brushing glue onto the piece, pressing it onto the pieces next to it, using that level to kind of keep everything on that one edge straight in line with one another, and then just moving down the line, row after row. My biggest fear in all this is I was going to put one of those small pieces in the wrong way, so it would run parallel with the longer pieces instead of perpendicular. And I actually did that once, I think, but noticed it before the glue had completely set, so I could get in there and fix it. I marked the edge that was up against the level on each of the 3 panels that I made, just so that I could come back and run that edge against the fence on my table saw to make sure I could get the other edge to be parallel. That's going to make it here, when I'm gluing the 3 panels together, I know I have parallel sides on all of them, so I get nice gap-free glue up, and then just use clamps on the seams to ensure everything stayed flat in the glue up. And then that sat until the next day after work. I could come back and start work on flattening the whole beast out, which was a chore. Belt sander did pretty good to get started, get it relatively flat, and then once I thought I had that good enough, I came back with my old hand plane and started shaving off, and this did pretty well. I sharpened the blade right before I started, and I think I did it twice more between both sides of the top panel, and I was able to get it pretty smooth. And then I just saw me fill any gaps I did have with some sawdust and wood glue, and then here I'm just using a straight edge and router to get a nice even side on the long sides of the short sides of the tabletop. So with the top out of the way, I moved on to working on a base. I wanted a base to the table, not just legs. I wanted something that actually looked like it was just a continuation of the top going down to the floor. So I cut strips a little bit wider than the strips were for the top. These, I think, were about 1.5 inches thick, and really just gonna use the strips. I cut them into smaller pieces to make leg sections, but here I'm just building up a thicker base around the perimeter and then a strip in the middle of the tabletop just to make sure that it's nice and rigid and isn't going to just sag over time from its own weight. On each end, on the short ends, you got the plies of plywood running vertical and then immediately switching to be horizontal, whereas on the long sides you've got the short pieces have the vertical grain with the actual face grain of the wood on either side, and then it goes right into the horizontal layers, and I just like how each side looks different. And this is when I just started building up the leg sections, and then to be sure they don't splay out and they're nice and sturdy, I just used a long piece across each side. And then I'll do that again when I get closer to the floor side of the table, just as more reinforcement to make sure that the legs stay nice and vertical and they don't want to rack side to side. And here you can just kind of see how I built up the legs to make sure they were nice and structurally sound, or the leg sections anyway. Tacking each layer down and moving on. Didn't have to wait for the glue to dry. First time I've used a brad nailer, and I really wish I would have gotten one a while ago. It was very handy. Just a lot of repetitive tasks on this project. It wasn't bad. It was easy to focus on, but at the same time easy to lose focus and to make sure that you paid attention and didn't put a long piece where a short piece needed to go, or vice versa. Would have made the leg look really weird and definitely would have been noticeable. And you can see I'm just measuring and cutting these long pieces to fit on there. And this is where I got to work with that bow a little bit and make sure I clamp down the ends so that they stay put. Again, this is just reinforcement to make sure those legs don't want to splay out near the floor. Somebody puts lateral pressure on the table. You want to make sure they stay nice and rigid. And the best part, onto the sanding. This was a lot of sanding. And the inside I didn't really get sanded that well. It was hard to get in there. And I was trying to get this done, get it submitted for the challenge, so I decided I wasn't going to focus too much on the inside. Then I just used a router for the round over bit to round over all the edges. Here though, where I couldn't round over, I just used sandpaper to get that because the router couldn't quite get in there. And it was just a matter of patching up some more holes with the old sawdust and wood glue wood filler. Did that all the way around it. And it was quite a bit. I don't show the whole thing here, but it was quite a bit of cracks and just little tiny seams that needed to be patched up. But with that out of the way, we could sand it one last time and then finally get it ready for some finish, which that's part of any project, when you can finally get some finish on it and see the grain. In this case it's plywood in grain, but it's still very cool to just see those different layers and stripes come out. And I just used 2 coats of shellac. I sanded between the 2 coats, and then I sanded again with 400 grit after the second coat, and then just wiped off the shellac dust. Give it a nice smooth finish. And this is done. It was a lot of work. I enjoyed doing it. And again, a huge thank you to the Modern Maker podcast, Mike, Chris, and Ben for putting on the challenge with Rockler. It was a lot of fun to do this project. I don't think I would have done it without the challenge, so I appreciate it. Thank you for stopping by and watching the video. I really do appreciate that. I'm still new to putting stuff out here on YouTube, so any suggestions or feedback you have for me, feel free to leave them down below. If there's something you think I can be doing better in my projects or my YouTube video, I'm open to all the feedback. Thanks again for stopping by my Bear Making channel. You guys have a great rest of your day.